She was the most photographed woman on the planet. Her face sold magazines. Her voice stopped rooms. Her name alone was enough to make entire studios nervous about what she might do next. And yet, when Marilyn Monroe died on August 5, 1962, she was found alone. No family beside her. No lover holding her hand. Just silence, Abadrum, and a bottle of barbiturates that the world is still arguing about more than 6 decades later. She left behind roughly $800,000, which in today's money sits closer to $7 million. She had jewelry, personal letters, clothing, the rights to her own image, her own name, the very idea of Marilyn Monroe. And when the lawyers opened that 3-page will, the people who loved her, the people who had been closest to her, walked away with almost nothing. Because every single thing that mattered, every asset that would go on to generate millions year long after her death, had been handed to one man. A man who was not her husband, not her ex-husband, not a family member, not a lifelong friend, her acting coach. And that decision, made quietly inside a will that most people have never read, set off a chain of events that turned Marilyn Monroe from a tragic Hollywood legend into one of the most profitable brands on earth. A brand controlled by people she barely knew, licensing her smile to corporations she never would have approved, selling off her most intimate belongings to the highest bidder. So before we get to the money and the machine that was built after her death, we need to understand how a girl who spent her childhood being passed between strangers ended up making a stranger the most powerful person in her afterlife. She was born Norma Jean Mortensen on June 1, 1926, in Los Angeles. Her mother, Gladys Pearl Baker, was a film negative cutter who suffered from severe mental illness. By the time Norma Jean was 8 years old, Gladys had been committed to a psychiatric facility, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. She would cycle in and out of hospitals for the rest of her life. And just like that, a little girl became a ward of the state. She passed through foster homes, through relatives, through the Los Angeles orphans' home, never staying long enough anywhere to feel like she actually belonged. She developed a stutter. She retreated into silence. She found comfort in movie theaters, sitting alone in the dark, staring at a screen big enough to swallow everything painful about her real life, WY16, to avoid being sent back to the orphanage when her guardians relocated out of state. She married her neighbor Jim Doherty. It was not a love story. It was survival. She would later describe that marriage as suffocating, a practical arrangement dressed up in a wedding dress. When Doherty shipped out to the Pacific during the war, Norma Jean took a factory job. And then a photographer named David Conover showed up on assignment, pointed a camera at her. And everything changed. She quit the factory. She bleached her curls platinum. She reinvented herself so completely that the girl from the orphanage disappeared. And in her place stood someone the world had never seen before. She chose the name Marilyn Monroe, borrowing Monroe from her mother's maiden name. And she never looked back. Her rise through Hollywood was not easy. It was calculated, relentless, and frequently humiliating. Studios signed her and dropped her. Executives underestimated her. She was told she had no talent, that she was too insecure, too difficult, too slow on set. She was cast again and again as the naive blonde, the walking punchline, the woman who existed to be desired rather than heard. She was paraded in bathing suits and evening gowns, dressed to distract rather than impress. But underneath all of it, she was studying, she was reading. She was training at the Actors Studio under Lee Strasberg, the man who would become the most consequential figure not just in her career, but in the fate of everything she ever owned. Lee Strasberg was the godfather of method acting in America. His Actors Studio in New York had shaped Marlon Brando, James Dean, Al Pacino, and dozens of others who redefined what screen performance could look like. When Marilyn arrived there in the mid-1950s, Strasberg recognized something in her that few people in Hollywood had taken seriously. He saw genuine emotional depth beneath the manufactured glamour. He worked with her privately. He became her teacher, her guide, and in many ways the first person in her adult life who made her feel intellectually worthy. She trusted him completely. She called him a father figure. And that trust, deep and real as it was, is what ended up costing her family everything. Her personal life during this period was its own kind of chaos. Her marriage to baseball legend Joe DiMaggio in January 1954 lasted less than a year, cracking under the weight of her growing fame and his inability to share the spotlight. The breaking point is now famous. The filming of the subway grate scene in The 7-Year Itch. Her white dress billowing upward while photographers captured the moment, and DiMaggio watched from a crowd, furious and humiliated. They divorced 9 months after the wedding. Yet DiMaggio never truly let go. For 20 years after her death, he arranged for roses to be placed on her grave 3 times a week. Whatever broke between them, something remained that outlasted everything else. Then came Arthur Miller, the playwright, the intellectual, the man who represented everything Marilyn wanted the world to believe she was capable of. They married in 1956, that the press called it the egghead and the hourglass. She called it love. But Miller's private diaries, which she accidentally discovered, revealed that he saw her as a burden, fragile and draining. That wound never healed. The marriage ended in 1961, just months before she died. By the time the divorce was finalized, she was already unraveling. 3 husbands. No children. A film career that studios were beginning to treat as more trouble than it was worth. And a growing dependence on the sleeping pills and sedatives she had used for years to quiet an anxiety that never left her. The Kennedy chapter of her story is one that history has never been able to close. In May 1962, she appeared at a fundraising gala at Madison Square Garden and sang Happy Birthday to President John F. Kennedy in a voice so slow and deliberate that the room went completely still. The moment has been analyzed endlessly. What was real and what was performance is something nobody has ever fully agreed on. Rumors of an affair between Marilyn and President Kennedy had circulated for years. Rumors of a subsequent involvement with Robert Kennedy followed. Whether those relationships were real, serious, or brief encounters inflated by gossip, the fact that she was connected to the most powerful family in America at the most vulnerable point in her life has never stopped generating questions. Recent investigative interest in her final days has only intensified those questions. Podcasts, newly surfaced accounts, and re-examined police reports have all circled back to the same gaps in the official record. Phone logs that were reportedly altered. Witnesses who changed their stories. A housekeeper who was cleaning the home at an unusual hour. A coroner's report that left key details unresolved. Whether her death on August 5, 1962 was suicide, accidental overdose, or something darker, the official ruling of probable suicide has never fully satisfied the millions of people who have studied it. What is not disputed is that she died alone, that she had made phone calls to people close to her in the hours before her death, and that the world woke up the next morning to a loss that felt completely impossible. Now here is where the story takes a turn that most people, even those who know her life well, don't fully realize. Before she died, Marilyn Monroe had written a will. It was 3 pages long. Inside it, she left 25% of her estate to her half-sister Bernice Miracle. She set aside funds to ensure her mother Gladys would be cared for in the psychiatric facility where she had spent most of her adult life. She left smaller amounts to a few friends and her personal secretary. And then the remaining 75%, including all rights to her name, her likeness, her image, her intellectual property, the very concept of Marilyn Monroe as a commercial entity, she left to Lee Strasberg. Strasberg himself died in 1982. And here is where it gets complicated. He had remarried a woman named Anna Strasberg, whom Marilyn had met only a handful of times. When Lee died, everything that Marilyn had left him passed entirely to Anna. A woman Marilyn Monroe barely knew suddenly controlled one of the most powerful celebrity estates in the world. Anna Strasberg moved quickly. She licensed Marilyn's face and name to hundreds of brands. Perfume, calendars, clothing lines, luxury campaigns. By the time Anna was finished building the machine, Marilyn Monroe the brand was generating millions of dollars annually year after year for decades after her death. In 1999, a Christie's auction sold Marilyn's personal belongings for over $13 million. Handwritten letters, personal photographs. The sequin dress she had worn posing to President Kennedy sold for over $1.2 million alone. Years later, That same dress reappeared at the Met Gala on another famous body, and the world lost its mind all over again, proving that Marilyn Monroe's power to stop a room had not dimmed even 60 years after her death. In 2011, the intellectual property rights were sold again, this time to Authentic Brands Group, a major brand management company that now controls her image globally. Today, Marilyn Monroe consistently ranks among the top 5 highest-earning deceased celebrities in the world, generating an estimated $20 to $30 million annually. Nearly 100 brands have used her likeness to sell their products. And the family she left behind? Her half-sister Bernice received her modest share. Her mother Gladys, already deep in the grip of mental illness, outlived her daughter by more than 20 years, spending most of that time in care facilities. Her famous daughter's name worth a fortune that had nothing to do with either of them. The people who had actually known Norma Jean, who had loved her before she was Marilyn Monroe, watched from the outside as a brand built itself on the bones of someone they had lost. What makes this story so difficult to sit with is not just the money. It is the irony at the center of it. Marilyn Monroe spent her entire life searching for stability, for belonging, for someone to truly see her. She moved through childhood in suitcases and borrowed bedrooms. She built herself from nothing into something the whole world wanted. She chased love into marriages that broke her. She sought intellectual respect in a system that preferred her silent and decorative. And when she finally trusted someone enough to hand over her entire legacy, she trusted the man who made her feel worthy as an artist. That choice, made with real feeling, real gratitude, real faith, ended up handing the keystone everything she had ever been to a stranger. She died at 36. The empire built on her name has now outlasted her by more than 6 decades and shows no sign of slowing. Every new generation discovers her all over again. Every new scandal, documentary, or biography reopens the same questions. Every time that white dress or that breathless voice resurfaces, the world remembers what it lost and what it never fully understood while she was still alive. Marilyn Monroe wanted to bake ends seriously. She wanted a home. She wanted love that lasted. She got none of those things. What she got instead was immortality, controlled by others, monetized endlessly, and debated forever. And somewhere in that irony is the truest and most heartbreaking thing you will ever know about the most famous woman who ever lived.